Here's something unsettling. Right now, as you're listening to this, you're following a script you didn't write. Not the words I'm saying. The script running in your relationships. It was written when you were too young to remember, by people who probably didn't realize what they were creating. And here's the twist that changes everything. You've been performing this script in every romantic relationship you've ever had, mistaking it for your authentic self, for love, for fate. A woman reaches for her phone for the 15th time today, checking if he's replied. Her heart races. 3 hours since he read her message. What did she say wrong? Meanwhile, across town, a man feels his chest tighten as his girlfriend says, "We need to talk." He's already planning his exit strategy, already feeling trapped, already thinking about work emails he could be answering instead. Neither of them realizes they're responding to something that happened 30 years ago, to a pattern encoded in their nervous system before they could walk or talk. But here's what almost no one tells you about these patterns. They're not just psychological. They're living in your brain chemistry, in the structure of your neurons, in the way your body produces stress hormones. They're predicting who you'll fall in love with, how long that love will last, and exactly how it will end. And the most shocking part, until you see the pattern, you can't escape it. You'll just keep living it out, relationship after relationship, wondering why the same story keeps happening with different people. Tonight, we're going to decode that script. We're going to trace these patterns back to their source, to discoveries made by researchers who filmed infants in strange rooms, who noticed what no one else saw, who proved that how you loved as a baby predicts how you'll love as an adult with eerie precision. And somewhere in this journey, you're going to recognize yourself. You're going to see, perhaps for the first time, the invisible architecture that's been guiding your relationships all along. What if I told you that, by understanding one 20-minute observation of how you behaved as a 1-year-old, a researcher could predict with startling accuracy whether your adult relationships would be stable or chaotic, fulfilling or frustrating, whether you'd stay married or divorce? It sounds impossible, almost deterministic. And yet the research shows exactly that. This is attachment theory, the most empirically supported framework we have for understanding love and relationships. It's not pop psychology or speculation. It's based on decades of longitudinal studies, brain scans, hormonal measurements, and observations of thousands of people across their entire lifespans. It's been replicated across cultures, across generations, across every demographic imaginable. But here's where it gets personal. There are 4 attachment patterns, and you have one of them. Maybe you recognize yourself already. In that woman checking her phone, drowning in anxiety. Maybe you're the man planning his escape, allergic to emotional closeness. Or maybe you're something else entirely, secure and comfortable, or caught in a confusing dance between wanting connection and fearing it simultaneously. The pattern you have shapes everything. Who attracts you? Hint, often the worst possible match for your pattern. How you fight, pursue or withdraw, flood or shut down. What you need to feel loved, and whether you can even accept it when it's offered. And most critically, whether you can change. Because that's the question haunting everyone who recognizes their dysfunctional pattern. Am I stuck like this forever? We're going to answer that question. But first, you need to understand where these patterns come from. And that story begins in an unexpected place, with orphaned children in post-war London, a researcher who defied Freud, and a discovery that would overturn everything psychology thought it knew about love. But here's where the science gets deeply personal. These aren't abstract theories or distant observations. This is about you, your nervous system, your automatic reactions, the way your heart races or your chest tightens in certain relationship moments. This is about the voice in your head that says, "They're going to leave," or "I need to get out of here," or "Why can't I just relax and trust this?" These thoughts feel like they're coming from your rational mind, making logical assessments. But they're not. They're echoes of patterns established before you could form coherent memories. Understanding attachment isn't about blame, not of your parents, not of yourself. It's about illumination. It's about finally seeing the invisible software running your relationships, the code written in your first 3 years that's been executing ever since. And here's the revelation that makes this all worthwhile. Once you see the code, you can rewrite it. Not easily, not instantly, but genuinely, measurably, permanently. Over the next hour, we're going to trace the entire arc of attachment science, from its controversial beginnings to its stunning validation in neuroscience labs. We'll explore each attachment pattern not just intellectually, but viscerally, so you feel what it's like to move through the world with each one. We'll examine the brain chemistry, the childhood origins, the adult manifestations. We'll look at the pairings that create the most suffering and the paths that lead to earned security. And somewhere in this journey, you'll have a recognition moment. You'll see yourself or your partner finally understanding behaviors that have confused or hurt you for years. That moment of recognition is where change begins. Because you can't change what you can't see, and most people spend their entire lives following attachment scripts they never knew existed. So take a breath. We're about to explore the most fundamental force shaping your relationships, the biological drive for connection, the patterns that either support or sabotage it, and the surprising story of how psychologists discovered that your capacity for love was largely determined in your first 1,000 days of life. Section 2. The heretic who proved Freud wrong. In 1944, a British psychiatrist named John Bowlby published a paper with an unremarkable title: 44 Juvenile Thieves, Their Characters and Home Life. What it contained would eventually overturn the most dominant psychological theory of the 20th century and earn Bowlby the enmity of his psychoanalytic colleagues. The paper presented case studies of young criminals, and Bowlby had noticed something his peers had missed. A shocking number of these troubled children shared one experience: prolonged separation from their mothers in early childhood. This shouldn't have been revolutionary. But in 1944, the prevailing Freudian wisdom held that infants attached to their mothers primarily because mothers fed them. Love, in this view, was secondary to hunger. The bond between mother and child was essentially transactional. The baby loved whoever provided food. Emotional connection was considered less important than physical care, and many psychologists believed that as long as a child's physical needs were met, their psychological development would proceed normally. Bowlby, born in 1907 into British upper-class society, had personal reasons to doubt this theory. His own childhood followed the strict conventions of his time and class: minimal contact with his mother, care delegated to nannies, emotional restraint valued above affection. When Bowlby was just 4 years old, his beloved nanny left the family. Decades later, he would describe this loss as devastating, comparable to losing a mother. This early experience of separation, while common for children of his class, planted seeds of doubt about prevailing theories of child development. But personal experience alone doesn't overturn scientific paradigms. Bowlby needed evidence. Working with delinquent and maladjusted children in the 1930s and 1940s, he meticulously documented their histories. The pattern was undeniable. Early maternal loss or emotional unavailability appeared in case after case. In his 1944 paper, Bowlby identified what he called affectionless psychopathy, a pattern of not caring about others that seemed to stem from not having been cared for themselves. Then came World War II, and with it, thousands of orphaned and displaced children across Europe. The devastation created a natural, though tragic, experiment. The World Health Organization commissioned Bowlby to study these homeless children. What he discovered confirmed his suspicions in the most heartbreaking way. Even in institutions where children's physical needs were meticulously met, where they were fed, clothed, kept clean and warm, they showed profound psychological distress. They went through a predictable sequence of responses that Bowlby would later call protest, despair, and detachment. First, the separated child would cry intensely, searching for their mother, protesting the separation with every fiber of their being. When the mother didn't return, protest gave way to despair. The child would become withdrawn, passive, showing signs of depression. Finally, if the separation continued, detachment would set in. The child would seem to lose interest in the missing caregiver, becoming emotionally flat, disconnected. This wasn't temporary upset. Follow-up studies showed lasting psychological damage. Children who experienced prolonged early separations were more likely to have difficulties with emotional regulation, relationships, and mental health throughout their lives. This suggested something radical. Emotional bonds weren't just pleasant add-ons to physical care. They were essential, primary, as necessary for healthy development as food or shelter. But Bowlby's most controversial move was still to come. In the 1950s, he turned to ethology, the study of animal behavior, for answers. This was heresy in psychoanalytic circles, where the rich inner world of human psychology was considered fundamentally different from animal behavior. Yet Bowlby was struck by the work of Konrad Lorenz, who had discovered imprinting in birds. Lorenz famously showed that baby geese would bond to, imprint on, the first moving object they saw after hatching, following it everywhere. This wasn't learned through reward or association. It was instinctual, biological, hardwired. What if human attachment worked similarly? Not through the same mechanism, obviously. Human infants don't imprint on the first person they see. But what if the drive to form bonds was equally biological, equally instinctual? What if babies weren't learning to love their mothers through repeated associations with food and comfort, but were instead born with an innate drive to seek proximity to caregivers? This is where Bowlby's theory became truly revolutionary. He proposed that humans are born with an attachment behavioral system, shaped by millions of years of evolution. In our ancestral environment, infants who stayed close to protective adults survived. Those who wandered off became prey. The babies who had strong attachment behaviors, crying, clinging, following, reaching, were the ones who lived long enough to reproduce and pass on those behaviors. Natural selection had wired the drive for connection directly into our biology. This meant attachment wasn't secondary to anything. It was primary, fundamental, an end in itself. Babies don't love their mothers because mothers feed them. Babies are biologically driven to seek proximity to caregivers because for 300,000 years, proximity meant survival. The attachment system, Bowlby argued, is as basic to human nature as hunger or thirst. Bowlby borrowed from control systems theory to describe how this system works. Think of a thermostat, maintaining room temperature. When temperature drops below the set point, heating activates. When it reaches the set point, heating deactivates. Similarly, when an infant perceives that their caregiver is unavailable or too distant, the attachment system activates. The baby cries, reaches out, crawls after the parent. Once the caregiver is close and responsive, the infant feels secure, and the system deactivates. The baby can then turn their attention to exploration, playing, learning, discovering. This led Bowlby to two concepts that would become central to attachment theory: the secure base and the safe haven. The secure base is the role the caregiver plays in providing a foundation of security from which the child can explore. When a child knows their caregiver is available and will respond if needed, They feel free to venture out, investigate, learn. You've seen this at any playground. A toddler plays happily, periodically glancing back to ensure mom or dad is still there. That backward glance is the secure base in action. The safe haven is where the child returns when frightened or hurt. If the toddler falls or feels uncertain, they run back to the caregiver for comfort. Once soothed and reassured, they can return to exploration. This dance, exploring from a secure base and returning to a safe haven when needed, characterizes healthy attachment. But Bowlby recognized that not all children experience this ideal pattern. What happens when the caregiver is inconsistently available? What if they're frightening rather than comforting? What if the child's attempts to connect are rejected? This is where different attachment strategies develop, different ways of adapting to get at least some needs met in whatever caregiving environment exists. Bowlby also introduced the concept of internal working models, mental representations built from early experiences with caregivers. These models contain expectations about yourself. Am I worthy of love? About others? Can people be trusted? And about relationships. What can I expect when I'm vulnerable? Critically, these models operate largely outside conscious awareness, automatically shaping how you perceive and respond in relationships throughout life. We'll explore these models in much more depth shortly, but for now, understand that they're the mechanism by which early experiences continue to influence adult relationships. Bowlby's ideas faced fierce resistance from the psychoanalytic establishment. His colleagues accused him of oversimplifying human psychology, of reducing complex emotional life to animal instincts. But Bowlby persisted, spending the next 3 decades developing and refining his theory. In the 1960s and 1970s, he published his magnum opus, a 3-volume work titled Attachment and Loss, that laid out the full theoretical framework. Yet theory alone, however elegant, isn't enough in science. Bowlby's ideas needed empirical validation. They needed to be tested in the real world, with real mothers and babies, using careful observation and measurement. That validation would come from an unlikely source, a Canadian psychologist who answered a job advertisement in the London Times and ended up transforming developmental psychology. Her name was Mary Ainsworth, and the experimental procedure she developed would reveal exactly how attachment patterns manifest in observable behavior. Section 3. The experiment that revealed everything. In 1950, Mary Ainsworth was browsing the London Times when she saw an advertisement that would change developmental psychology forever. John Bowlby was looking for a research assistant. Ainsworth, a Canadian psychologist who had recently moved to London with her husband, applied. Neither she nor Bowlby realized this chance meeting would forge one of the most productive collaborations in psychological science. But Ainsworth brought more than research skills to Bowlby's team. She had been trained by William Blatz at the University of Toronto in security theory, ideas about how children develop confidence through secure relationships. This background primed her to see what others might miss when observing mothers and infants. After working with Bowlby for several years, Ainsworth moved to Uganda in 1954, where she would conduct the first systematic study of attachment in natural settings. For months, Ainsworth visited 28 Ugandan families in their homes, observing mothers and infants in everyday life. She watched how babies responded when mothers left the room. She noted which infants seemed confident in their mother's availability and which seemed anxious or uncertain. She observed how different mothers responded to their babies' signals, some quickly and sensitively, others slowly or not at all. Patterns began to emerge. Not all mother-infant pairs looked the same. Some babies used their mothers as secure bases, confidently exploring. Others clung anxiously or seemed indifferent to their mother's presence. When Ainsworth returned to the United States and took a position at Johns Hopkins University in the late 1950s, she designed a more controlled way to study these patterns. Working with her colleague Sylvia Bell, she created what would become the most widely used assessment tool in attachment research, the strange situation procedure. Here's what makes the strange situation brilliant. It's deceptively simple, taking only 20 minutes, yet it reveals profound truths about relationships. The procedure consists of 8 episodes, each lasting about 3 minutes, in a laboratory room containing toys. The episodes are carefully designed to gradually activate the infant's attachment system through brief separations. First, mother and infant enter the room. The infant can explore the toys while the mother sits quietly. This establishes baseline exploration behavior. Then a stranger enters and attempts to interact with the infant. Next comes the first separation. The mother leaves and the infant is briefly alone with the stranger. The mother returns for the first reunion, a critical moment. After a few minutes, the mother leaves again, and this time, the infant is completely alone. The stranger returns and attempts to comfort the infant if needed. Finally, the mother returns for the second reunion. Trained observers focus intensely on those reunion moments. How does the infant respond when their mother comes back? This response, Ainsworth discovered, reveals the child's internal working model of attachment, the expectations built from countless daily interactions about whether caregivers are reliably available and responsive. From extensive observations in both Uganda and Baltimore, Ainsworth identified 3 distinct patterns. The first she called secure attachment, found in about 60 to 65% of typical middle-class infants. These babies use their mother as a secure base, happily exploring when she's present. When she leaves, they show clear signs of distress, crying, searching for her, protesting her absence. But here's the defining feature. Upon reunion, they actively seek contact, reaching for their mother, and are readily comforted by her presence. Once soothed, they can return to playing. The mother functions as both safe haven and secure base. Ainsworth's home observations revealed what distinguished these mothers. They were sensitively responsive to their baby's signals. They could read their infant's cues accurately, responding promptly and appropriately. This doesn't mean perfection. They sometimes misread signals or responded with delay. But the overall pattern was one of availability and attunement. These mothers could distinguish between cries of hunger, discomfort, or boredom. They provided comfort when needed and encouraged exploration when the infant was ready. The second pattern was avoidant attachment, found in about 20 to 25% of infants. These babies seemed remarkably independent. During separations, they appeared relatively unfazed, continuing to play with toys. But here's what Ainsworth recognized as adaptive strategy rather than true security. Upon reunion, these infants actively avoided contact with their mother. They might turn away, move to a different part of the room, or ignore her attempts to engage. They showed what's called defensive exclusion, minimizing attachment behaviors to protect against expected rejection. Home observations told the story. Mothers of avoidant infants tended to be emotionally unavailable or actively rejecting, particularly when the infant sought closeness. They might attend efficiently to physical needs, feeding, changing, bathing, but they showed discomfort with emotional intimacy. They might stiffen when the baby wanted to cuddle, move the baby away when trying to cling, or show irritation at emotional displays. The infant learns that expressing attachment needs leads to rejection, so they develop a strategy of minimizing those behaviors, appearing more independent than they feel. The third pattern was resistant attachment, also called anxious-ambivalent, found in about 10 to 15% of infants. These babies appeared anxious even before separation, often clinging to their mother and showing little interest in exploring the toys. During separation, they became extremely distressed. But upon reunion, and this is the key distinction, they showed a confusing combination of seeking and resisting contact. They might reach for their mother, but then angrily push her away. They might continue crying and fussing even when held. They were difficult to comfort, and their distress didn't quickly subside. The home observations revealed unpredictability. Mothers of resistant infants were inconsistent, sometimes warmly responsive, other times preoccupied or unavailable. The infant never knew what to expect. This uncertainty created what Ainsworth termed anxious attachment. The infant maximizes attachment behaviors, crying louder, clinging harder, attempting to ensure they get at least some response from an unpredictable caregiver. The anger upon reunion reflects frustration and uncertainty. Will you be here next time I need you? What made Ainsworth's work revolutionary wasn't just identifying these patterns, it was demonstrating that they're systematically related to the quality of care the infant receives. Attachment security wasn't random or temperamental, it was shaped by caregiving. Sensitive, responsive care produced secure attachment. Rejecting care produced avoidance. Inconsistent care produced anxiety. This empirical validation of Bowlby's theory transformed attachment from interesting speculation into established science. The strange situation also revealed something crucial about measuring attachment. It's not primarily about how distressed a child becomes during separation. Many children get upset when their parents leave. What matters is how the child organizes their behavior around the goal of maintaining connection with the caregiver, and especially how they respond upon reunion. The reunion reveals their expectations and their strategy for getting needs met. Follow-up studies demonstrated that strange situation classifications weren't just capturing momentary states. They predicted outcomes years later. Securely attached infants tended to become more socially competent, better at emotion regulation, more confident in exploration, and more successful with peers. Anxiously attached children showed more emotional dysregulation and dependency. Avoidant children showed more emotional restriction and social withdrawal. Later research would identify a fourth category, disorganized attachment, which we'll explore in depth. But Ainsworth's three original patterns formed the foundation for everything that followed. She had shown that Bowlby's theory wasn't just theoretically elegant, it was empirically valid. Attachment patterns could be reliably identified. They related predictably to caregiving quality, and they had meaningful consequences for development. Perhaps most importantly for our story, Ainsworth created a template. If these patterns existed in infancy, if they were this fundamental and this consequential, might they persist into adulthood? Might the same patterns of secure, anxious, and avoidant attachment manifest in adult romantic relationships? For years, no one asked that question. Attachment remained firmly in the domain of infant development. But in the 1980s, two researchers would make a conceptual leap that extended attachment theory into adult relationships, revealing that the patterns Ainsworth observed in one-year-olds were also shaping how adults loved, fought, and either sustained or destroyed their romantic bonds. Section 4. The invisible software running your life. Here's something that might unsettle you. Right now, as you're processing these words, your brain is running programs written when you were 2 years old. Programs that determine how you interpret your partner's text message delay, whether you feel safe asking for help, if that moment of silence in a conversation feels comfortable or terrifying. These aren't metaphorical programs. They're actual neural networks, built from thousands of interactions, operating below conscious awareness, shaping every intimate moment you experience. Bowlby called these programs internal working models, and understanding them is understanding why you keep having the same relationship experiences, even with different partners, even when you consciously want something different. Imagine you're an infant, completely dependent on others for survival. You're hungry, tired, scared, or in pain, and you cry out. What happens next isn't just a single event. It's data. Your developing brain is recording. Did someone come? How quickly? Did they understand what I needed? Did they help? This data accumulates, creating patterns, building expectations. By age 3, you've internalized a model of how relationships work, and that model will guide you for decades. If cries were consistently met with warm, appropriate responses, you learned, I matter, my needs are valid, others can be trusted. The world is safe enough to explore. This becomes your working model, not as conscious thoughts, but as automatic assumptions operating beneath awareness. But if cries were met with delay, irritation, or nothing at all, you learned something different. Maybe. I need to cry louder and longer to be noticed. My needs are burdensome. I can't rely on others. Or perhaps, expressing needs leads to rejection. I must be independent. I can't show vulnerability. These aren't just memories or beliefs you can easily identify and challenge. They're encoded as expectations that operate automatically, filtering every relationship experience through a lens you didn't know you were wearing. The concept draws on cognitive psychology and schema theory. A schema is a mental framework helping you organize information and make predictions. You have schemas for everything. What happens in restaurants, how stories unfold, what dogs are like. These are useful because they let you navigate situations without figuring everything out from scratch each time. Internal working models function similarly, but specifically for relationships. They contain interconnected beliefs about self and others. Research suggests these models operate on 2 primary dimensions. Model of self. Am I worthy of love and care? Can I effectively get my needs met? Am I fundamentally okay as I am? Model of others. Are other people available and responsive? Can they be trusted to care for me when I need them? Are relationships sources of comfort or disappointment? These models work together, creating expectations about how relationships unfold. Based on years of attachment research, we can infer that a child experiencing consistent, responsive care likely develops a positive model of both self, I am lovable, valuable, worthy of care, and others, people can be trusted, they'll be there when needed, relationships provide comfort. This configuration supports secure attachment. A child experiencing rejection or emotional unavailability develops a different configuration. The research indicates they might form a model of others as unavailable or rejecting. People can't be relied upon. And by extension, a model of self as perhaps unworthy. Why else wouldn't even my caregiver want to comfort me? This pattern appears to support avoidant attachment, minimizing attachment needs and maintaining distance to protect against rejection. A child experiencing inconsistent care faces different challenges. Their model of others becomes uncertain. Sometimes people are there, sometimes not, with no predictable pattern. This unpredictability, studies suggest, breeds anxiety. The model of self focuses on doubts. Am I worthy of consistent care? What must I do to ensure response this time? This configuration seems to support anxious attachment, hyperactivating attachment behaviors to maximize chances of getting response. Here's what makes these models so powerful. Once formed, they become self-perpetuating through several mechanisms that have been documented in research. First, they direct attention. If your model tells you others are unreliable, you'll be hypervigilant for signs of unavailability or rejection. You'll notice when your partner doesn't text back immediately or seems distracted. Someone with a more secure model might not even register these moments, but they loom large for you because they confirm your expectations. Second, they shape interpretation. The same behavior gets interpreted completely differently depending on your model. Your partner says they need alone time. Secure model. They're introverted and need to recharge. Nothing to do with me. Anxious model. They're pulling away, losing interest, going to leave. Avoidant model. Good. I was feeling too close anyway. Third, they influence behavior in ways that can elicit confirming responses. This is where the model becomes truly self-fulfilling. If you believe others will reject you, you might withdraw emotionally or put up defensive walls. This behavior can push people away, seeming to confirm that others can't be trusted. If you believe you need to maximize emotional expression to get response, you might become demanding or clingy, which can exhaust your partner, leading them to withdraw, which confirms your fear that you can't rely on them. They affect memory. Research on attachment and memory indicates that people's attachment-related memories are filtered through current working models. Someone with avoidant attachment might have difficulty recalling specific instances of emotional support from parents, not necessarily because these didn't occur, but because their model emphasizes self-reliance and minimizes importance of emotional connection. Someone with anxious attachment might ruminate on past hurts and rejections because their model is organized around uncertainty and fear of abandonment. Critically, these models aren't just cognitive, they're deeply emotional and physiological. They include expectations about how you'll feel in different situations, tied to automatic emotional and bodily responses. When an avoidantly attached person's partner moves toward emotional intimacy, their model might trigger automatic feelings of discomfort or claustrophobia accompanied by physiological responses, chest tightening, desire to flee, even if they can't articulate why. When an anxiously attached person's partner is unavailable, their model might trigger intense feelings of panic and abandonment, with corresponding physiological activation, racing heart, hyperventilation, far beyond what the situation objectively warrants. Research also suggests we can hold multiple internal working models simultaneously, sometimes in conflict. You might have one model based on your relationship with your mother, another based on your father. Or you might have conscious beliefs about relationships that conflict with deeper, implicit models. You might intellectually believe you deserve love and care, but a deeper model, formed from early experiences of neglect, tells you you're not worthy. That deeper model often drives behavior in intimate moments. The concept of internal working models helps explain the documented continuity in attachment patterns from infancy through adulthood. The infant who experienced consistent, responsive care doesn't just remember those experiences. They build a mental framework that says, "This is how relationships work." This framework then guides behavior in future relationships, making it more likely they'll form secure connections with friends, teachers, romantic partners. Similarly, the infant who adapted to inconsistent care by becoming anxiously vigilant carries that model into adulthood, where it continues to shape approach to intimacy. But, and this is where hope enters, internal working models are not fixed. While they tend toward stability, particularly when continually reinforced by similar relationship experiences, they can be updated. New experiences, particularly in close relationships, can gradually modify these models. This is why attachment patterns can change, and it's the foundation for attachment-based therapy. Studies of neuroplasticity support this possibility of change. By bringing implicit models into conscious awareness, by examining where they came from and whether they still serve you, And by having new relationship experiences that contradict the old model, you can build new, more secure internal working models. The brain that built these patterns in response to early experiences can build new patterns in response to new experiences. Think of it this way. Your internal working model is like a pair of glasses you've worn so long you forgot you're wearing them. The glasses tint everything you see, but you don't notice the tint. You think you're seeing reality as it is. Becoming aware of your internal working model is like suddenly realizing you're wearing tinted glasses. Once you know they're there, you can start to account for the tint. You can begin to ask, is this really how things are? Or is this just how my model expects them to be? That awareness alone creates possibility for change. And as we'll explore later, through therapy, through conscious relationship work, through new corrective experiences with secure partners, these models can be rewritten. Not easily, not instantly, but genuinely, measurably, lastingly. As we move to explore how these patterns play out in adult romantic relationships, keep these internal working models in mind. They're the invisible architecture shaping your reactions, your interpretations, your fears, and your hopes. They're why attachment patterns feel so automatic, so natural, so much like just who you are. But they're not who you are. They're adaptations you made, brilliant solutions to the challenges you faced as a completely dependent infant. And understanding them is the first step toward choosing, consciously and deliberately, the kind of relationships you want to build now. Action 5. The discovery that love is attachment. For nearly 3 decades after Ainsworth's groundbreaking work, attachment remained confined to the study of infants and young children. The research was prolific. Hundreds of studies documenting how childhood attachment influenced emotional regulation, peer relationships, school performance, self-esteem. But a conceptual wall separated childhood attachment from adult life. Once you grew up, you moved beyond attachment. Adult relationships, especially romantic ones, seemed to belong to a different category entirely, governed by different rules, driven by different needs. Then, in 1987, 2 researchers published a paper that would shatter that wall forever. Cindy Hazen and Philip Shaver, working at the University of Denver, asked a question so obvious in retrospect that it's remarkable no one had seriously investigated it before. What if adult romantic relationships are attachment relationships? What if the same biological system driving an infant to seek proximity to their mother also drives adults to seek closeness with romantic partners? The paper was titled, "Romantic Love Conceptualized as an Attachment Process," and reading it now feels like watching someone switch on lights in a dark room. Suddenly, everything becomes visible that was always there. Hazen and Shaver began with a simple observation. Look at the defining features of infant attachment: proximity seeking, separation distress, safe haven, secure base. Now look at adult romantic love. The parallels are undeniable. Romantic partners want to be near each other, especially during stress. They feel distressed when separated for extended periods. They turn to each other for comfort when frightened or hurt. They use each other's support as a secure base for pursuing goals and exploring the world. Of course, adult romantic relationships include elements absent in infancy: sexuality, mutual caregiving, reciprocity. But beneath these additional layers, Hazen and Shaver argued, lies the same fundamental attachment system that operated in your crib. If this was true, if adult love was partly an attachment phenomenon, then a prediction naturally followed. The same individual differences Ainsworth observed in infants should appear in adults. Just as there are secure, avoidant, and anxious infants, there should be secure, avoidant, and anxious adults in their romantic relationships. And crucially, adult patterns should reflect internal working models built from early relationships with caregivers. To test this, Hazan and Shaver created what they playfully called a love quiz. They wrote brief descriptions of 3 attachment styles and asked people to choose which description fit them best. The secure description emphasized comfort with closeness and trust in partners. The avoidant description emphasized discomfort with intimacy and difficulty depending on others. The anxious description emphasized worry about abandonment and desire for extreme closeness. They published the quiz in a local newspaper and waited to see what would happen. What happened validated their theory in ways they could barely have hoped for. First, the distribution of adult attachment styles almost perfectly matched Ainsworth's infant distributions, about 60% secure, 25% avoidant, 15% anxious. This suggested remarkable stability, the same proportions maintained from infancy to adulthood. Second, attachment style predicted memories of childhood relationships. Secure adults remembered their parents as warm, responsive, and accepting. Avoidant adults remembered their mothers as cold and rejecting. Anxious adults remembered their parents as inconsistent and unpredictable. The internal working models built in childhood were still accessible in memory decades later. Third, and this is where the theory proved its practical importance, attachment style was systematically related to romantic relationship experiences. Secure adults described their love relationships as happy, friendly, and trusting. They believed romantic love could last and weren't afraid of intimacy or abandonment. Avoidant adults described discomfort with closeness, difficulty trusting partners, and skepticism that love endures. Anxious adults described intense but unstable relationships marked by preoccupation, fear of abandonment, and emotional volatility. The research community responded with an explosion of interest. Within a decade, hundreds of studies explored adult attachment. Researchers developed more sophisticated measures, moving beyond simple self-report questionnaires. They discovered that attachment isn't really 3 discrete categories, but rather exists along 2 dimensions: anxiety, degree of worry about abandonment, and avoidance, degree of discomfort with closeness. Different combinations of high and low anxiety and avoidance create different attachment patterns. The research revealed that attachment style influences virtually every aspect of romantic relationships. It predicts who you're attracted to. Secure people gravitate toward secure partners, while insecure individuals often find themselves drawn to equally insecure partners in complementary ways. It determines how you communicate. Secure individuals use clear, direct communication, while anxious individuals might pursue and demand, and avoidant individuals might withdraw or deflect. Attachment style shapes how you handle conflict. When couples fight, secure partners stay engaged, express feelings clearly, and work toward resolution. Anxious partners might escalate emotionally, pursuing their partner even as they withdraw, desperate to repair the rupture immediately. Avoidant partners might stonewall, shutting down emotionally, insisting they need space, sometimes leaving physically. Here's where the neuroscience we'll explore later becomes relevant. Attachment activation and deactivation aren't just psychological, they're physiological. When your attachment system activates in response to threat, real or perceived separation, partner unavailability, conflict, your entire nervous system responds. Heart rate changes, stress hormones release, neural networks engage. How you manage this activation depends on your attachment style. Secure individuals respond with what's called a flexible attachment strategy. They can activate their attachment system when needed, seeking proximity, expressing needs, requesting reassurance, and deactivate it once reassured, returning attention to other life domains. They can be close when closeness is needed and independent, when independence is appropriate. Anxious individuals respond with hyperactivation. Their attachment system goes into overdrive at the slightest threat. They intensify emotional expression, increase demands for reassurance, ruminate obsessively about the relationship, and have difficulty self-soothing. It's as if the volume is turned up on everything attachment-related. Even when reassurance is provided, it doesn't last. The system remains chronically activated. Avoidant individuals respond with deactivation. When their attachment system starts to activate, they shut it down. They distance themselves emotionally, minimize the importance of intimacy, suppress awareness of attachment needs, and distract themselves with work or other activities. They've developed sophisticated defenses against feeling or expressing vulnerability. Research also revealed that your attachment pattern isn't something you carry in isolation. It plays out in dynamic interaction with your partner's pattern. Two secure partners tend to maintain mutual security through consistent responsiveness. A secure partner paired with an anxious partner might gradually help the anxious person become more secure through reliable availability. But certain pairings create painful dynamics. The anxious-avoidant pairing is particularly common and particularly problematic. The anxious person's pursuit of closeness activates the avoidant person's discomfort with intimacy, causing withdrawal. The avoidant person's withdrawal activates the anxious person's fear of abandonment, intensifying pursuit. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Pursue, withdraw, with each partner's behavior confirming the other's worst fears and most maladaptive patterns. One of the most important discoveries in adult attachment research is that while attachment styles show stability, they're not fixed traits. Your general attachment orientation tends to remain relatively consistent across relationships, but your attachment state, how secure you feel in a specific relationship at a specific time, can vary considerably. You might be secure with one partner and anxious with another, depending on how available and responsive each partner is. This means attachment emerges partly from what you bring to relationships, your internal working models, your learned strategies, and partly from what your partner provides, their actual behavior, their responsiveness. A consistently responsive partner can shift your attachment state towards security even if your general style is insecure. Conversely, an inconsistent or rejecting partner can activate insecurity even in someone who's generally secure. The extension of attachment theory to adult relationships wasn't just an academic achievement. It transformed therapeutic practice. Couples therapists began incorporating attachment principles, helping partners understand each other's attachment needs and fears. Emotionally focused therapy, developed by Sue Johnson in the 1980s, explicitly based on attachment theory, became one of the most empirically supported approaches to couples counseling, with success rates around 70 to 75%. This framework helps couples understand that relationship conflicts often aren't really about the surface issue. Who does more housework? Whether to spend holidays with which family? How money should be spent? Beneath these content issues lie attachment fears. Am I important to you? Will you be there when I need you? Can I trust you? Am I safe with you? When couples can recognize and address the attachment issues underlying their conflicts, repair becomes possible in ways it wasn't before. The anxious partner can learn to express needs more directly rather than through protest behaviors. The avoidant partner can learn to stay engaged rather than withdrawing. Both can gradually build the security that may have been missing in their early relationships. As we move forward to explore each attachment style in detail, remember, your attachment pattern in romantic relationships isn't destiny. It's an adaptation, a strategy you learned for navigating closeness based on your experiences. Understanding your pattern creates the possibility of conscious choice. Instead of automatically reacting from old models and fears, you can pause, reflect, and choose responses that serve your adult relationships better than strategies developed when you were pre-verbal. Security isn't just something you're born with or without. It's something that can be cultivated, earned, and built throughout your entire life. Action 6. Secure attachment. The dance of trust and freedom. Here's what secure attachment looks like in a moment you might not expect. Your partner texts saying they need to talk tonight about something important. If you're securely attached, you feel curious, maybe a little concerned, but not terrified, not catastrophizing, not spending the next 4 hours imagining worst-case scenarios or frantically texting, "What's wrong? Tell me now!" This is secure attachment's superpower, not the absence of concern, but the presence of trust. The baseline belief that even if this conversation is difficult, you'll handle it together. That something important probably doesn't mean I'm leaving you. Let's explore what secure attachment actually looks like, not because it's better in a moral sense, but because it represents optimal functioning of the attachment system, the pattern allowing both deep intimacy and healthy independence, trust in connection without fear of losing oneself. Understanding secure attachment gives us a template, a North Star toward which those with insecure patterns can work. Research indicates approximately 55 to 60% of adults have secure attachment styles, though this percentage varies across cultures and populations. But what does that actually mean in daily life? You wake up in the morning beside your partner. Their presence is comforting, but not essential to your sense of safety. You're happy they're there, and you'd miss them if they were gone, but you don't need constant reassurance that they're not leaving. There's a baseline of trust, not naive or unexamined, but earned through consistent experience, that tells you this person is here, they care about you, and they'll continue to be here tomorrow and the day after. During the day, you might text your partner, not from anxiety that they're forgetting about you, but because you saw something that made you think of them, or you want to share a small moment. You don't worry excessively about how quickly they respond. If they're in a meeting or busy, you assume they'll get back to you when they can. You don't interpret delayed responses as signs of waning love or impending abandonment. When your partner does something that upsets you, forgets something important, speaks to you sharply or seems distracted, you feel the hurt or frustration, but you don't immediately catastrophize. You don't think, "This is it, they're pulling away, the relationship is falling apart." Instead, you might think, "That hurt my feelings. I need to talk to them about this." And crucially, you believe that when you bring it up, they'll listen and care about how you feel. You trust the process of repair. When conflict does arise, you're able to stay relatively calm and engaged. Yes, you might get frustrated or even angry, but you don't withdraw into cold silence or escalate into intense emotional flooding. You can express your needs and feelings clearly, and you can listen to your partner's perspective even when it differs from yours. You understand that disagreement isn't a threat to the relationship. It's a normal part of two separate people learning to navigate life together. You believe that you can disagree and still love each other, that working through conflict can actually strengthen your bond. When you're upset or stressed about something outside the relationship, work troubles, family issues, health concerns, you naturally turn to your partner for support. This isn't always your first instinct for every problem, and you don't expect your partner to solve everything, but you feel comfortable sharing your struggles and seeking comfort. You're not afraid that showing vulnerability will make you seem weak, or that your partner will judge you for not having it all together. And when your partner offers support, you can actually take it in. You can be comforted. The reassurance or perspective they offer actually helps you feel better. Equally important, when your partner is the one who's upset or needs support, you're able to be there for them. You don't feel overwhelmed by their emotions or see their distress as a burden. You don't dismiss their feelings or try to fix everything immediately. You can sit with them in their difficulty, offering presence and support without needing to make it all better right away. In terms of intimacy, secure attachment means you're comfortable with both closeness and separateness. You enjoy emotional intimacy, sharing your thoughts, fears, hopes, vulnerabilities. You enjoy physical intimacy, and it feels like a natural expression of connection rather than something fraught with anxiety or avoidance. But you also value and protect space for yourself. You might have hobbies, friendships, or time alone that's important to you, and you don't feel guilty about wanting that space. Similarly, you support your partner having their own interests and relationships. When they spend time with friends or pursue their own passions, you don't feel threatened or abandoned. You understand that interdependence is healthier than complete fusion, that you're two separate people who choose to share a life together, not two halves trying to become whole. Your internal working model, if you're secure, looks something like this. I am worthy of love and care. I am fundamentally okay as I am. Other people can be trusted. When I reach out, people will generally respond. Relationships are a source of support and joy. Yes, there will be challenges and conflicts, but those can be worked through. People sometimes disappoint me, and I sometimes disappoint others. But that doesn't mean the relationship is doomed. I can be close to someone without losing myself. I can depend on others while still maintaining my own sense of identity. This model creates a particular emotional landscape. Securely attached people generally feel comfortable with the full range of emotions. They can feel and express love, joy, anger, sadness, fear, without being overwhelmed by any of them. They have good emotional regulation. They can soothe themselves when distressed, but they can also seek support from others. They don't have to choose between self-reliance and depending on others. They can do both, depending on the situation. The origins of secure attachment, as we've discussed, lie in consistent, responsive caregiving in childhood. If you were lucky enough to have caregivers who were emotionally available and attuned, who responded to your needs with sensitivity, who provided comfort when you were distressed and encouraged exploration when you were ready, you likely developed a secure attachment style. Your internal working model was built from experiences that taught you, I matter. My needs are valid. Others are generally trustworthy. The world is safe enough to explore. But it's important to emphasize that secure attachment doesn't mean perfect caregiving, and it doesn't mean a childhood free of stress or hardship. Life happens. Good parents have bad days, make mistakes, sometimes misread their children's cues. What matters for security is the overall pattern, what researchers call good enough parenting. It's about being generally available and responsive, about repairing ruptures when they occur, about the child feeling seen and valued most of the time. Securely attached adults tend to have better outcomes in virtually every measured domain of relationship functioning. They report higher relationship satisfaction and stability. They communicate more effectively, are better at resolving conflicts constructively, and feel more comfortable with both intimacy and independence. They're less likely to experience jealousy, anxiety about their relationship, or fear of abandonment. They're more trusting and more trustworthy, both because they expect the best from others and because they're reliable and responsive themselves. In terms of mental health, secure attachment is protective. Securely attached adults generally have better emotional well-being, lower rates of depression and anxiety, higher self-esteem, and better stress management. When challenges arise, and they always do, securely attached people tend to cope more effectively, drawing on both their own resources and support from others. There's also evidence that secure attachment is contagious in relationships. If one partner is securely attached and consistently responsive, their partner can become more secure over time, even if they started with an insecure pattern. This is part of what researchers call earned security, the possibility of developing security through new relationship experiences, particularly with a secure partner who can serve as a kind of surrogate secure base. But perhaps the most important thing to understand about secure attachment is what it's not. It's not about being perfect, invulnerable, or never experiencing relationship difficulties. Securely attached people still feel hurt when their partner is insensitive. They still worry sometimes about their relationship. They still have moments of doubt or conflict. Security isn't the absence of negative emotions or relationship challenges. It's about having confidence that you can navigate those challenges together, that difficulties don't spell doom, that you can repair what gets broken, that your partner is fundamentally on your side even when things are hard. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in the description of secure attachment, take a moment to feel grateful for that foundation. It's a gift, often given by caregivers who themselves received it. And if you find yourself building secure relationships and raising children, you have the opportunity to pass that gift forward. And if you're reading this and thinking, "This doesn't sound like me at all," if the level of trust and comfort with intimacy described here feels foreign or frightening, that's okay too. Security isn't something you either have or don't have permanently. As we'll explore later, attachment patterns can change. Understanding what secure attachment looks like gives you a target to move toward, a vision of what's possible in relationships. You can develop what's called earned security through therapy, through relationships with securely attached partners, through conscious work on yourself and your patterns. The brain remains plastic throughout life, and internal working models can be updated. Security is always a possibility, regardless of where you started. On Section 7, Anxious Attachment, the fear of losing what you love most. It's 2:47 a.m. and you're wide awake, phone in hand, rereading the text conversation from earlier. Your partner said they needed space tonight. Just space. Just one evening to decompress after a stressful week. They said they loved you. They said they'd call tomorrow. But now it's been 6 hours, and you've constructed 17 different scenarios for why they're pulling away, losing interest, preparing to leave. The rational part of your brain knows this is excessive. They literally said, "I love you. I just need one quiet evening." But that doesn't stop the panic rising in your chest, the urge to text them one more time, just to make sure everything's okay, just to hear them say it again. This is anxious attachment. And if you recognize yourself in this 2:47 a.m. panic, you're not alone. Research suggests approximately 15 to 20% of adults have anxious, preoccupied attachment styles, though the experience is far more common than the percentage suggests. As many people have anxious tendencies, even if they're not categorized as fully anxious. Now let's step fully into this world, not to judge it, but to understand it from the inside. You want to text them again, but you stop yourself. You don't want to seem clingy or needy, but the worry grows. You replay your last conversation, searching for anything you might have said wrong, any sign that they were pulling away. You remember they seemed distracted last night. Were they? Or are you imagining things? The uncertainty is excruciating. When they finally respond, "Sorry, was in a meeting," you feel a flood of relief, but it's temporary. The anxiety lurks beneath the surface, waiting for the next moment of uncertainty, the next sign that maybe, possibly, they're slipping away from you. This is the landscape of anxious attachment. It's not occasional worry or fleeting insecurity. It's a persistent state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for signs of rejection, constantly needing reassurance, constantly afraid that the person you love will leave you. If you have an anxious attachment style, your internal working model might sound something like this. I really need closeness and connection. I want to be completely merged with my partner. But I'm not sure I'm worthy of that love. What if they see the real me and leave? What if I'm too much? What if I'm not enough? I need constant reassurance that they still love me. But even when they provide it, I can't quite believe it. There's always a voice saying, "But for how long?" This model creates a painful paradox. You desperately want intimacy, but you don't quite trust that it's real or that it will last. You're drawn to close relationships, but you're perpetually anxious within them. Love feels wonderful, but also terrifying, because the closer you get, the more you have to lose. Where does this pattern come from? Anxious attachment typically develops from inconsistent caregiving in childhood. Imagine a child whose mother is sometimes warm and responsive, but other times distracted, unavailable, or overwhelmed by her own problems. The child never knows what to expect. Sometimes when they cry, they're quickly comforted. Other times, no one comes. Sometimes physical affection is welcome, other times the parent pushes them away. This unpredictability is bewildering and frightening for a child. They can't develop a stable sense that their needs will be met, so they can't trust that the caregiver will be there when needed. The child's solution is to amplify their attachment behaviors. They cry louder, cling harder, protest more intensely. They're trying to maximize the likelihood that someone will respond this time. This is what researchers call a hyperactivating strategy. This strategy makes sense in the child's environment. If responses are unpredictable, making yourself impossible to ignore increases your odds of getting your needs met at least some of the time. But this strategy, carried into adulthood, creates relationship difficulties. As an adult with anxious attachment, you tend to feel intense attraction quickly. You might fall hard and fast, seeing new partners as perfect, as the one, as the answer to all your longings. You want to move toward deep commitment quickly. "I love you" comes early, and you're imagining a future together after just a few dates. But underneath this intensity is profound insecurity. You need constant reassurance that your partner loves you. You want to be in frequent contact, texting throughout the day, spending most evenings together, integrating your lives as completely as possible. When your partner needs space or time with friends, you feel hurt and anxious. Intellectually, you might understand they need independence, but emotionally, it feels like rejection. You wonder, am I not enough for them? Are they pulling away? Is this the beginning of the end? In conflicts, your anxiety can flood you. A disagreement might feel catastrophic, like the relationship is about to end. You might become emotionally dysregulated, crying intensely, feeling panic, unable to think clearly. Or you might pursue your partner aggressively, needing to talk it through right now, unwilling to let them have space to cool down because the separation feels unbearable. The protest behaviors that made sense when you were an infant reaching for an inconsistent caregiver get played out in adult arguments where they can overwhelm and exhaust your partner. You're also prone to jealousy and worry about infidelity, not necessarily because your partner has given you reason to doubt them, but because your internal working model tells you that people leave, that you're not enough to hold someone's interest, that there's always the possibility they'll find someone better. Social media can be torture. Why did your partner like their ex's photo? Why are they following that attractive person? Each small action becomes a potential sign of betrayal. Interestingly, anxiously attached individuals often find themselves drawn to avoidant partners. Why? There are a few reasons. First, avoidant partners are often inconsistently available, sometimes warm, sometimes distant. And this pattern is familiar. It matches the inconsistency you experienced in childhood. Second, avoidant partners keep you slightly off balance, always wondering where you stand, and this activates your attachment system. creating intense feelings that you might mistake for passion or love. Third, the challenge of winning over someone who's emotionally guarded feels like an opportunity to prove your worth. If you can just get them to fully love you, it will mean you're finally enough. But this pairing creates a painful dynamic called the anxious-avoidant trap. The anxious partner pursues closeness, which activates the avoidant partner's discomfort with intimacy, making them withdraw. The avoidant partner's withdrawal activates the anxious partner's fear of abandonment, making them pursue more intensely. This cycle can escalate, with each partner's behavior triggering the other's deepest fears, until one or both become exhausted and the relationship ends, seeming to confirm each person's internal working model. "See, I knew they'd leave." Or, "See, relationships are suffocating." Anxiously attached individuals also engage in what researchers call protest behaviors. When you feel your partner pulling away or being unavailable, your attachment system goes into protest mode. You might act out by threatening to leave, even though you don't want to, by trying to make them jealous, by withdrawing your own affection as punishment, by creating drama or conflict to ensure their attention. These behaviors don't feel calculated. They feel like desperate attempts to re-establish the connection you fear you're losing. But they often backfire, pushing partners away or creating cycles of conflict and reconciliation that leave everyone exhausted. In your inner experience, anxious attachment is marked by rumination. You spend a lot of time thinking about your relationship, analyzing interactions, replaying conversations, trying to read between the lines. When your partner is unavailable, your mind races with worst-case scenarios. When things are going well, you might paradoxically feel anxious because you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. You also have difficulty being alone. Time by yourself doesn't feel restful or restorative. It feels empty and lonely. You prefer to be with your partner, or, if that's not possible, to be in frequent contact via phone or text. You might fill your schedule with social activities to avoid being alone, because being alone allows the anxiety to creep in. Despite these challenges, anxiously attached individuals bring real strengths to relationships. You're often very attuned to emotional nuances, able to pick up on subtle shifts in your partner's mood. You value emotional intimacy and are willing to be vulnerable. You're typically comfortable expressing feelings and needs, even if the way you express them is sometimes intense. You're capable of great passion and devotion. You truly value closeness, and you're willing to invest time and energy in your relationships. The path towards security for anxiously attached individuals involves several key shifts. First, developing better emotional regulation, learning to sit with anxiety without immediately acting on it, finding ways to soothe yourself rather than always needing your partner to soothe you. Second, building self-esteem that isn't entirely dependent on your relationship, recognizing your inherent worth, not just your worth in a partner's eyes. Third, learning to tolerate your partner's need for independence without interpreting it as rejection. Fourth, practicing asking directly for what you need rather than using protest behaviors or testing. Therapy can be enormously helpful, particularly approaches that help you understand where your patterns came from, identify the triggers that activate your anxiety, and develop new ways of responding. Finding a securely attached partner who can provide consistent responsiveness without being overwhelmed by your intensity can also foster earned security over time. If you recognize yourself in this description, know that your desire for closeness isn't something to be ashamed of. The longing for deep connection is part of being human. What's challenging is the way anxiety undermines the very intimacy you're seeking. But with awareness and work, you can learn to hold your needs with less desperation, to trust more deeply, and to build the secure, lasting love you've always wanted. On Section 8, Avoidant Attachment, the fortress of independence. I love you. 3 words. Your partner just said them for the first time, eyes vulnerable, waiting for you to say them back. And instead of warmth flooding your chest, instead of joy or relief or gratitude, you feel trapped, suffocated. Your mind immediately catalogs their annoying habits, the way they laugh too loud, text too often, need too much reassurance. An hour ago, everything was fine. Now you're mentally planning your exit strategy. Welcome to avoidant attachment, where the very closeness you might consciously want triggers an automatic system of emotional distancing. Affecting approximately 20 to 25% of adults according to attachment research, avoidant attachment isn't about not caring. It's about caring too much and having learned that caring hurts. If anxious attachment is the fear of abandonment, avoidant attachment is the fear of entrapment. Let's explore what this really feels like. Or imagine your partner is upset about something. Maybe they lost their job, or they're having family problems. They come to you for comfort, for emotional support. But instead of feeling moved to help, you feel uncomfortable, maybe even irritated. You want to fix the problem or offer practical solutions, but the emotional intimacy they're asking for, the vulnerability, the tears, the need, makes you want to back away. You might find yourself thinking, why are they being so emotional? Or, they need to toughen up and handle this. This is the landscape of avoidant attachment. It's not that you don't feel anything, though you might tell yourself and others that you're just naturally less emotional. It's that getting close, depending on someone, needing someone, or having someone depend on you feels deeply uncomfortable, maybe even threatening. So you keep people at arm's length, often without fully realizing you're doing it. If you have an avoidant attachment style, your internal working model might sound like this. I don't really need anyone. I'm fine on my own. Relationships are nice, but they're not essential. Getting too close to someone means losing my independence, and that's not worth it. People always want more than I can give. Emotional intimacy is uncomfortable and maybe even weak. I'm better off relying on myself. This model creates its own paradox, though it's different from the anxious paradox. You might desire connection on some level, humans are wired for it after all, but you don't trust it. You associate closeness with vulnerability, and vulnerability with danger. Better to not need anyone than to need someone and be disappointed or hurt. Where does this pattern come from? Avoidant attachment typically develops from a childhood with caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, rejecting of emotional expression, or uncomfortable with physical closeness. Maybe your parents were present and responsible in practical ways. You were fed, clothed, housed, but they were emotionally distant. When you cried, they told you to stop being dramatic. When you reached for comfort, they pushed you away or seemed uncomfortable. When you expressed fear or sadness, they dismissed it or told you to be strong. Or perhaps your parents were outright rejecting when you showed attachment needs. Maybe they ridiculed you for being clingy or needy. Maybe they valued independence and self-reliance above all else, praising you when you didn't cry or when you handled things on your own, and showing disapproval when you sought help or comfort. For a child in this environment, expressing attachment needs leads to rejection or discomfort, not comfort. So the child learns to suppress those needs, to deactivate the attachment system. This is a brilliant adaptation in that environment. If showing your needs gets you pushed away, better to not show them. If depending on others leads to disappointment, better to be self-reliant. The child develops what researchers call a deactivating strategy, minimizing attachment needs and maximizing independence. Carried into adulthood, this strategy manifests in characteristic patterns. Avoidantly attached adults often describe themselves as very independent, self-sufficient, not particularly emotional. They might say things like, "I don't really need anyone," or "I'm perfectly happy being single," or "I don't understand why people get so worked up about relationships." In romantic relationships, avoidant individuals tend to keep partners at a comfortable distance. They might be very selective about who they date, setting their standards so high that few people meet them. This isn't just about quality. It's also a protective mechanism that ensures they don't get too close to anyone. When they do enter relationships, they often prefer relationships with built-in distance, long-distance relationships, dating someone who's not quite available, or being with someone who doesn't demand much emotional intimacy. As relationships deepen, avoidant individuals employ various distancing strategies. They might focus excessively on their partner's flaws, devaluing them to justify maintaining distance. They might idealize ex-partners or fantasize about alternatives, keeping themselves mentally detached from their current relationship. They might prioritize work, hobbies, friends, or family over their romantic partner, keeping the partner in a more peripheral role. They might avoid deep conversations, deflect when their partner tries to discuss feelings or the relationship, or respond with intellectualization rather than emotional engagement. Physical intimacy can be complex for avoidant individuals. Casual sex might feel safe because it doesn't involve emotional vulnerability. But intimate sexuality within a committed relationship can feel threatening because of the emotional closeness it implies. Some avoidantly attached people lose interest in sex as the relationship deepens, without understanding that what they're really uncomfortable with is the intimacy, not the sex itself. When conflict arises, avoidant individuals tend to withdraw. Unlike anxiously attached people who pursue and escalate, avoidant individuals might shut down, refuse to engage, or leave the conversation. They might use what relationship researcher John Gottman calls stonewalling, becoming emotionally unreachable, giving minimal responses, closing off. This isn't necessarily a conscious punishing behavior. It's often an automatic response to feeling overwhelmed or threatened by emotional intensity. Avoidant individuals are also less comfortable with self-disclosure and vulnerability. They might share factual information about themselves, but keep their emotional life private. They might struggle to name or express their own feelings. When their partner asks, "How are you feeling?" they might respond with, "I'm fine," even when they're not, because they've learned to suppress awareness of their own emotional states. Here's something crucial to understand. Avoidant individuals aren't necessarily happier being alone, despite what they might tell themselves. Research shows that avoidant individuals do experience loneliness and do benefit from close relationships, even though they're uncomfortable with them. The suppression of attachment needs doesn't eliminate the needs. It just pushes them out of awareness. This is why avoidant individuals sometimes surprise themselves by feeling devastated when a relationship ends, or by feeling intense connection in brief moments that bypass their usual defenses. Avoidant individuals are often drawn to anxious partners, though the reasons are different from why anxious individuals are drawn to avoidant partners. Anxious partners do the heavy lifting of emotional expression and connection, freeing the avoidant person from having to initiate intimacy. The anxious partner's pursuit allows the avoidant person to maintain distance while still being in a relationship. They can be the pursued rather than the pursuer. And when the anxious partner gets too close, the avoidant person has a reason to pull back, maintaining their comfort zone of distance. But this pairing, as we've noted, creates suffering for both partners. The anxious person feels perpetually rejected and unloved, while the avoidant person feels perpetually pressured and suffocated. The anxious partner interprets the avoidant partner's need for space as lack of love, while the avoidant partner interprets the anxious partner's need for closeness as neediness. Both are operating from their internal working models, trying to get their needs met, but their strategies are in direct conflict. Interestingly, two avoidant people can sometimes form stable relationships, though they might be emotionally distant by most standards. They respect each other's need for independence, don't pressure each other for emotional intimacy, and find connection through shared activities rather than emotional disclosure. These relationships can work, though they might lack the deep emotional intimacy that characterizes secure bonds. Avoidant individuals bring real strengths to relationships when they can begin to relax their defenses. They're often very competent and capable, having learned to rely on themselves. They're not typically jealous or possessive. They give their partners space and freedom. They can be stable and reliable in practical ways. They don't create a lot of emotional drama. When they do commit, they often show loyalty through actions rather than words. The path toward security for avoidant individuals involves several key shifts. First, becoming aware of and acknowledging your own emotional life, learning to identify and name feelings, recognizing that emotions aren't dangerous. Second, gradually increasing tolerance for vulnerability and intimacy. Small steps of sharing, of letting someone in, of admitting you need help or comfort. Third, challenging the belief that independence is the only path to safety, recognizing that healthy interdependence is actually a strength. Fourth, learning that emotional expression doesn't equal weakness, that asking for what you need doesn't make you needy. Therapy can help tremendously, especially approaches that create a safe space to explore emotions and practice vulnerability. Finding a secure partner who can be patient, who doesn't pursue too intensely, but also doesn't give up, who can provide consistent presence without demanding immediate deep intimacy, can also foster earned security over time. If you recognize yourself in this description, know that your desire for independence and your discomfort with vulnerability aren't character flaws. They're adaptive strategies you developed to protect yourself in an environment where emotional needs weren't safely met. But those strategies, while they protected you as a child, might now be limiting your capacity for the connection you deserve. With awareness and work, you can learn to let people in, to trust that closeness doesn't mean losing yourself, and to build relationships that honor both intimacy and autonomy. Section 9. Disorganized attachment. When love and fear collide. Your partner reaches out to comfort you during a difficult moment, and you freeze. Not metaphorically, literally freeze. Body rigid, mind blank. Part of you desperately wants that comfort. Another part is screaming danger. Get away, this isn't safe. You might pull them close, then push them away seconds later. You might feel intense love followed immediately by terror. The emotional whiplash is exhausting, and you have no idea why you're like this. This is disorganized attachment, sometimes called fearful avoidant, and it's the most complex and painful of the attachment patterns. First identified by Mary Main and Judith Solomon in the 1980s through their analysis of strange situation videos, disorganized attachment represents what they termed fright without solution, the impossible dilemma of needing comfort from the very person who feels frightening. Research indicates approximately 5 to 10% of adults show primarily disorganized attachment, though this percentage is significantly higher in populations with trauma histories. This pattern typically develops when caregivers were either frightening, through abuse, harsh treatment, or extreme anger, or frightened, overwhelmed by their own trauma, showing fear themselves, dissociating. Let's understand this pattern with the compassion it deserves. In adulthood, disorganized attachment manifests as a pattern that combines both anxious and avoidant features in ways that feel contradictory and confusing, both to the individual and to their partners. The internal working model of someone with disorganized attachment might sound like this. I desperately want closeness and connection, but intimacy terrifies me. I long to trust someone, but trust feels impossible. Getting close to someone feels like walking toward danger, but being alone is unbearable. I want to let someone in, but I'm convinced that if they really see me, they'll either hurt me or leave. This creates a profound and painful conflict. The person simultaneously yearns for and fears intimacy. They want love, but expect that love comes with pain. They're drawn to relationships, but feel endangered by them. They need others, but don't believe others can be relied upon. They see themselves as both unworthy of love and desperate for it. In relationships, this pattern manifests as volatility and unpredictability. A person with disorganized attachment might rapidly shift between pursuing closeness and pushing their partner away. They might be very warm and loving one moment, then cold and distant the next. They might desperately seek reassurance, but when their partner provides it, they can't trust it or absorb it. They might test their partner repeatedly, creating crises to see if the partner will stay, or pushing them away to prove that everyone leaves eventually. Disorganized individuals often find themselves in relationships that recapitulate their early trauma. They might be drawn to partners who are inconsistent, volatile, or even abusive, because this feels familiar. The chaos and unpredictability of such relationships, while painful, fit their internal working model of what relationships are like. Healthier, more stable relationships can actually feel uncomfortable or boring because they don't match the template the person has internalized. When conflict arises, disorganized individuals might respond in extreme ways. They might escalate very quickly to intense anger or panic. They might say or do things that push their partner away, then desperately try to pull them back. They might threaten to leave, not as manipulation, but because in the moment the fear is so overwhelming that escape feels necessary, even though they don't really want to go. They might also have difficulty recovering from conflicts. The rupture feels catastrophic, and repair feels impossible. Disorganized attachment is also associated with dissociation, a psychological defense mechanism where a person disconnects from their thoughts, feelings, or sense of self when overwhelmed. During times of high stress or intimacy, a person with disorganized attachment might space out, feeling foggy or disconnected, unable to fully process what's happening. They might not remember what they said or did during an intense argument. This isn't intentional, it's an automatic response to overwhelming threat. Emotionally, disorganized individuals often experience profound instability. They might have intense mood swings, difficulty regulating their emotions, and a tendency toward emotional flooding, being overwhelmed by feelings they can't control or manage. They might feel emotionally numb for periods, then suddenly be flooded with intense emotion. This dysregulation stems from the early environment that didn't provide the co-regulation necessary for the child to develop their own emotional regulation capacities. Self-perception in disorganized individuals is often very fragile. They might oscillate between seeing themselves as fundamentally flawed and seeing others as dangerous, or they might hold both beliefs simultaneously. They might struggle with identity, a sense of not really knowing who they are or feeling like different selves in different contexts. This instability of self stems from inconsistent early mirroring and validation. It's important to understand that disorganized attachment is strongly associated with trauma histories, including childhood abuse, neglect, and witnessing domestic violence. It's also overrepresented in individuals with certain mental health diagnoses, including borderline personality disorder and complex PTSD. This doesn't mean everyone with disorganized attachment has these conditions, but there's significant overlap. The good news is that disorganized attachment can heal. though it often requires more intensive support than other attachment patterns. Trauma-informed therapy, particularly approaches like EMDR, somatic experiencing, or internal family systems that directly address trauma and help reorganize fragmented aspects of self, can be profoundly helpful. Attachment-based therapy that provides a corrective relationship experience with a stable, attuned therapist can also gradually help the person develop more secure internal working models. Relationships with secure partners can also be healing, though they require patience and commitment. A secure partner can provide the consistent, non-frightened, non-frightening presence that the person with disorganized attachment never had in childhood. Over time, this consistent experience can begin to update the internal working model, teaching the person that relationships can be safe, that intimacy doesn't have to come with terror, that repair is possible after rupture. For individuals with disorganized attachment, the path toward security involves several key elements. First, trauma processing, directly addressing the frightening experiences that created the disorganization in the first place. Second, developing emotional regulation skills, learning to notice, name, and modulate intense emotions rather than being overwhelmed by them or dissociating from them. Third, building a more stable sense of self, integrating fragmented aspects of identity. Fourth, gradually practicing trust in safe relationships, tolerating the vulnerability of letting someone close without immediately pushing them away or fearing annihilation. If you recognize yourself in this description, please know this: your fear and your longing are both valid. The fact that you want love but are terrified of it isn't a contradiction you're making up. It's a reflection of your early experiences where love and fear were entangled. Your struggles with relationships aren't your fault. You're dealing with the legacy of experiences that should never have happened. But with support, with time, and with the right resources, you can develop the security that was denied you in childhood. You can learn that intimacy can be safe, that you can be loved without being hurt, that you don't have to choose between connection and survival. Section 10. The Neuroscience of Attachment. Love in the Brain. Here's something remarkable. If we put you and your partner in an fMRI scanner and showed you pictures of each other, we could predict your attachment style based purely on which parts of your brain light up. Secure attachment? Your reward centers activate. Anxious attachment? Your amygdala, the fear center, shows heightened activity. Avoidant attachment? Reduced activation in areas associated with emotional processing. These patterns aren't just in your head in the psychological sense. They're literally in your brain structure, your neurochemistry, your nervous system's automatic responses. Attachment isn't abstract. It's biology. Understanding the neuroscience of attachment reveals why these patterns feel so automatic, so unchangeable, and simultaneously why change is actually possible through the brain's remarkable plasticity. Let's explore love at the molecular level. Oxytocin plays a crucial role in attachment formation from the very beginning of life. During childbirth, oxytocin triggers labor contractions, but it also floods the mother's brain, facilitating maternal bonding with the newborn. When a mother holds her baby, makes eye contact, or breastfeeds, oxytocin is released, creating feelings of warmth, love, and connection. The baby's brain also releases oxytocin in response to touch, warmth, and the mother's presence. But oxytocin isn't just about mother-infant bonding. It's involved in all forms of attachment throughout life: romantic partnerships, close friendships, even the bond between humans and dogs. Oxytocin facilitates trust, increases social approach behavior, enhances the ability to read emotions in others' faces, reduces anxiety in social situations, and promotes feelings of closeness and connection. Here's where it gets interesting for attachment styles. Research shows that securely attached individuals tend to have different oxytocin responses compared to insecurely attached individuals. When securely attached people interact with their partners, touch them, or think about them, they show robust oxytocin responses. This oxytocin release supports feelings of bonding and reduces stress. Anxiously attached individuals show a more complicated pattern. They may have elevated baseline oxytocin in some studies, possibly reflecting their hyperactivated attachment system. They're constantly seeking connection, so their oxytocin system is chronically activated. But they also show heightened oxytocin responses to relationship stress or uncertainty, which may amplify their emotional distress rather than calming them. Avoidantly attached individuals, on the other hand, often show blunted oxytocin responses. Their deactivating strategy extends to the neurochemical level. They suppress not just attachment behaviors, but the neurochemical systems that support bonding. Some research suggests that avoidantly attached individuals might have genetic variations in the oxytocin receptor gene that make them less responsive to oxytocin's effects. Now let's talk about cortisol and the stress response. Cortisol is produced by the adrenal glands as part of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis, the body's main stress response system. When you encounter a stressor, your brain triggers the release of cortisol, which mobilizes energy, increases alertness, and prepares you to deal with the threat. This is adaptive in the short term, but chronic elevated cortisol has negative effects on health, cognition, and emotional well-being. Attachment relationships serve a crucial stress buffering function. When you're securely attached, the presence of your attachment figure, or even just thinking about them, can reduce your stress response. Studies show that securely attached individuals have lower baseline cortisol levels and show quicker recovery after stressful events. Their attachment figures serve as external regulators of their stress system, helping them return to baseline more quickly. For children, this co-regulation is essential for developing their own emotion regulation capacities. When a distressed infant is comforted by a responsive caregiver, the caregiver's calm presence literally calms the infant's stress response. Their cortisol levels come down, their heart rate slows, their breathing becomes regular. Over time, through thousands of these co-regulation experiences, the child internalizes the ability to self-regulate. But when caregiving is inconsistent, frightening, or absent, this regulation doesn't happen effectively. Children with insecure attachment often show dysregulated cortisol patterns. Some show chronically elevated cortisol. Their stress system is always activated, always on alert. Others show blunted cortisol responses. Their HPA axis has become less reactive, possibly as an adaptation to chronic unpredictability or threat. These early cortisol patterns can persist into adulthood and affect how your body responds to stress throughout life. Adults with insecure attachment are more likely to show heightened cortisol responses to relationship stress, and they're less able to use their partners as stress buffers, either because they don't seek comfort, avoidant, or because even when they receive comfort, it doesn't calm them, anxious. Brain imaging studies have also revealed structural and functional differences associated with attachment patterns. The amygdala, a brain region crucial for processing threat and generating fear responses, tends to be more reactive in insecurely attached individuals. When shown faces with angry or fearful expressions, or when reminded of relationship stresses, insecurely attached individuals show stronger amygdala activation compared to securely attached individuals. The prefrontal cortex, which is involved in emotion regulation, planning, and conscious decision-making, shows different patterns as well. Securely attached individuals tend to show better connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, suggesting better top-down regulation of emotional responses. This makes sense, Secure individuals are better at modulating their emotional reactions, thinking clearly during stress, and not being overwhelmed by fear or anxiety. For individuals with disorganized attachment, particularly those with trauma histories, neuroimaging reveals even more striking differences. The hippocampus, crucial for memory formation, is often smaller in individuals with histories of childhood trauma. The amygdala is often larger and more reactive. There's reduced connectivity between different brain regions, which may relate to dissociation, the feeling of being disconnected from oneself. These aren't permanent changes, however. They represent the brain's adaptation to an environment of chronic threat, and they can change with healing and new experiences. Another fascinating area of research involves mirror neurons and social cognition. Mirror neurons are brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that action. They're thought to be crucial for empathy, for understanding others' emotions and intentions, for the feeling of resonance we experience with close others. Secure attachment appears to enhance mirror neuron functioning and social cognition more generally. Securely attached individuals are better at recognizing emotions in others' faces, more accurate at perspective-taking, and more empathic. They're also better at something called mentalization, the capacity to understand that others have their own minds, thoughts, and feelings that may differ from your own. Insecure attachment can compromise these capacities, though in different ways. Avoidant individuals may suppress empathic responses as part of their deactivating strategy. Anxious individuals may be highly sensitive to others' emotions, but misinterpret them through the lens of their fears. They might see rejection or anger where none exists. Disorganized individuals may struggle with mentalization so more profoundly, having difficulty maintaining a stable sense of others as separate beings with coherent intentions. There's also emerging research on genetics and epigenetics, how genes and gene expression relate to attachment. Certain gene variants are associated with increased risk of insecure attachment, particularly variants in genes related to oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin systems. But importantly, these genes don't determine attachment by themselves. Rather, they create vulnerabilities or sensitivities that interact with environmental factors. Epigenetics, changes in gene expression caused by environmental factors, provides another mechanism for how early attachment experiences get under the skin. Traumatic or neglectful early environments can cause chemical modifications to DNA that change how certain genes are expressed. For instance, childhood adversity can lead to methylation of the oxytocin receptor gene, making individuals less responsive to oxytocin's pro-social effects. These epigenetic changes can potentially be passed to the next generation, providing a biological mechanism for the transmission of attachment patterns across generations. But here's the hopeful part. Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to change throughout life, means that these neurobiological patterns aren't permanent. Secure relationships, therapy, mindfulness practices, and other interventions can literally rewire neural networks, modify neurochemical responsiveness, and even reverse some epigenetic changes. Studies of earned secure attachment show that individuals who develop security, despite insecure origins, show brain patterns more similar to those who were secure from the beginning. Successful therapy for trauma and attachment issues is associated with measurable changes in brain structure and function, reduced amygdala reactivity, increased prefrontal cortex activation, improved connectivity, normalized cortisol patterns. The neuroscience of attachment gives us a powerful framework for understanding why attachment patterns feel so deeply ingrained, why they're not just thoughts we can think differently, and why simple conscious effort isn't always enough to change them. These patterns are encoded in neural networks built over years of experience. They involve automatic emotional responses, stress regulation systems, and deeply ingrained ways of processing social information. But this neuroscience perspective also offers hope. If the brain built these patterns in response to early experiences, it can build new patterns in response to new experiences. If neural networks can be strengthened through use, they can also be modified through deliberate practice of new behaviors. If oxytocin and cortisol systems became dysregulated, they can become better regulated. The same plasticity that allowed early experiences to shape your brain allows new experiences to reshape it. Understanding the neuroscience of attachment helps us have compassion for ourselves and others. When you feel overwhelmed by anxiety about your relationship, or when you shut down in the face of intimacy, or when you can't trust even when someone has proven themselves trustworthy, these aren't just choices or character flaws. They're the product of deeply embedded neurobiological patterns built from your earliest experiences. And while changing them requires effort and often support, they can change. Your brain remains capable of learning, growing, and building new ways of being in relationship throughout your entire life. And Section 11, Transformation and Earned Security. The possibility of change. Here's the question that's probably been building since the beginning of this video. Can attachment styles actually change? Or are you sentenced to repeat the same patterns forever, trapped by experiences you can't even remember, doomed to recreate your childhood relationships in every adult romance? The answer, backed by decades of longitudinal research, is unequivocal. Yes, attachment patterns can change. But there's a twist. The change isn't magic, it's not instant, and it requires something specific that most people don't know about. Studies tracking people from infancy to adulthood find that roughly 25 to 30% of individuals move from insecure to secure attachment during their lives. That's millions of people who started with anxious or avoidant patterns and gradually built security. The question isn't whether change is possible, it's how it happens, and what you need to know to make it happen for you. Let's explore the science of earned security. What allows attachment patterns to change? Several factors emerge from the research. First, and most importantly, new relationship experiences, particularly relationships with securely attached partners. When you're in a relationship with someone who is consistently available, responsive, and attuned, it provides experiences that gradually contradict your insecure internal working models. If your model says, "People will reject me when I show my needs," but your partner consistently responds with warmth and care, eventually the model has to update to accommodate this new data. This process isn't instantaneous. Internal working models are sticky. They resist change because they're built on hundreds or thousands of experiences. One positive experience won't override years of negative ones, but over time, with repeated experiences of secure relating, the model begins to shift. You start to trust more, to believe that this particular person won't leave, to risk more vulnerability. And as you do, the relationship deepens, providing even more corrective experiences, creating a positive feedback loop toward security. Therapy is another powerful pathway to earned security, particularly attachment-focused therapies. The therapeutic relationship itself can serve as an attachment relationship, a corrective emotional experience where you gradually learn that it's safe to be vulnerable, that your needs matter, that ruptures can be repaired. A skilled therapist provides the consistent, attuned, responsive presence that may have been missing in your early life. Different therapeutic approaches support earned security through different mechanisms. Psychodynamic therapy helps you understand where your patterns came from, bringing unconscious models into awareness, where they can be examined and challenged. Cognitive behavioral approaches help you identify distorted thoughts and practice new behaviors. Emotionally focused therapy, EFT, specifically designed for couples based on attachment theory, helps partners understand each other's attachment needs and fears, and teaches them to respond to each other in more secure ways. Trauma-focused therapies like EMDR or somatic experiencing address the frightening experiences that created disorganized attachment, helping reorganize fragmented internal models. Research on therapy outcomes shows that successful therapy for relationship difficulties is associated with movement toward security. People who complete EFT, for instance, show significant increases in attachment security. Those who complete trauma therapy show reductions in disorganized attachment. The changes aren't just self-reported, they show up in behavioral observations, in physiological measures, and in brain scans. Self-awareness and intentional work also matter enormously. When you become aware of your attachment pattern, recognizing your triggers, understanding your strategies, seeing how your internal working model shapes your perceptions, you create the possibility of choice. Instead of automatically responding from your pattern, you can pause, reflect, and choose a different response. For anxiously attached individuals, this might mean recognizing when your fear of abandonment is being triggered, reminding yourself that your partner's need for space doesn't mean they're leaving, and resisting the urge to pursue or create drama. It might mean developing self-soothing skills so you don't need constant external reassurance. It might mean building self-esteem that isn't entirely dependent on your relationship. For avoidantly attached individuals, it might mean noticing when you're starting to distance yourself, reminding yourself that intimacy isn't actually dangerous, and deliberately choosing to stay engaged rather than withdrawing. It might mean practicing vulnerability, sharing something emotional, asking for support when you need it, letting your partner see you cry. It might mean challenging beliefs like, "I don't need anyone," or "emotions are weak." For disorganized individuals, the work is often more intensive and requires professional support, but it involves similar principles. Recognizing triggers, understanding that current relationships aren't the same as past trauma, learning to tolerate vulnerability without dissociating or fleeing, building a more coherent sense of self. Research also shows that simply becoming a parent can sometimes shift attachment patterns toward security, though not always. For some people, having a child activates a deep desire to provide better than what they received, and this motivation, combined with learning about child development and attachment, can help them build security. For others, unfortunately, parenthood activates their own attachment wounds, and without support, they may repeat the patterns they experienced. Life circumstances matter too. Major life events, positive or negative, can shift attachment patterns. Experiencing trauma or loss can move someone from secure to insecure as their sense of safety in the world is shattered. But positive events can also create movement toward security. A job that provides stability and validation, a community that offers belonging, a mentor who believes in you, even a good therapist who helps you see yourself differently. There's also a concept called attachment states versus attachment traits. While your general attachment style is a trait-like pattern, your attachment state can vary depending on the specific relationship and context. You might be secure with one partner, but anxious with another, depending on how available and responsive each partner is. This suggests that attachment isn't entirely internal. It emerges in the interaction between your internal working model and your partner's actual behavior. This also means that being in a relationship with a secure partner who consistently provides security can shift your attachment state toward security, even if your general trait remains somewhat insecure. The neuroscience we discussed earlier supports the possibility of change. Neuroplasticity means that your brain can literally rewire itself based on new experiences. Neural networks that have atrophied from disuse can be strengthened. Overactive stress response systems can be calmed. Blunted oxytocin responses can become more robust. These changes require consistent new experiences over time. The brain needs repetition to build new neural pathways, but they're absolutely possible. One study that beautifully illustrates earned security followed adults who were identified as securely attached despite having experienced early adversity. Researchers interviewed these individuals to understand what had helped them develop security. Several themes emerged: having at least one emotionally available caregiver, even if not the primary one, a grandparent, an older sibling, a teacher; developing a coherent narrative about their difficult experiences, understanding how their past shaped them without being defined by it; forming secure relationships in adolescence or adulthood that provided corrective experiences; engaging in therapy or personal growth work, and having a kind of resilience or determination to not repeat the patterns they experienced. This last point is important. Agency matters. While you can't simply will yourself into security, your conscious commitment to change, your willingness to do the hard work of therapy or relationship repair, your practice of new behaviors even when they feel uncomfortable, these intentional efforts support the brain's capacity to change. It's also worth noting that movement toward security isn't always linear. You might make significant progress, then encounter a setback, a stressful life event, a partner's betrayal, a reactivation of old trauma that temporarily pulls you back toward your old pattern. This doesn't mean your progress was fake or that you're back to square one. It means you're human, and stress impacts everyone. The question is whether you can recover, whether you can use your new awareness and skills to get back on track, whether the overall trajectory is toward greater security, even if the path isn't straight. If you're working toward earned security, be patient with yourself. Remember that these patterns were built over years. They won't change overnight. Celebrate small victories, the time you asked for support instead of withdrawing, the moment you stayed present through discomfort instead of fleeing, the conversation where you said what you needed instead of hoping your partner would guess. These moments matter. They're the building blocks of new neural pathways, new internal working models, new ways of being in relationship. And if you're in a relationship with someone who's working on their attachment issues, be patient with them too. Understand that their struggles aren't about you. They're about patterns built long before you came along. Your consistent, secure presence is a gift, even when it feels like you're not making a difference. You are. Every time you respond with warmth instead of withdrawal, every time you stay instead of leaving, every time you prove their internal working model wrong, you're offering them the possibility of earned security. The story of attachment doesn't have to be the story of your childhood determining your destiny. It can be the story of the brain's remarkable capacity to heal and grow, of relationships' power to transform us, of the possibility that we can become different, better, more secure versions of ourselves. Security isn't just something you're born with or without. It's something you can earn, something you can build, something you can offer yourself and others throughout your entire life. Section 12. The Reveal. You already started changing. We've traveled a long way together tonight, from orphaned children in post-war London to brain scans showing oxytocin responses, from Ainsworth's careful observations of infants to the complex dance of adult love. We've explored secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized attachment, looking not just at what they are, but at how they feel from the inside, how they shape every intimate corner of our lives. But now comes the part that changes everything, the reveal that recontextualizes this entire journey. And it's going to sound absurdly simple at first, so stay with me. Here it is. The moment you became aware of your attachment pattern, the pattern began to change. Let me explain why this isn't motivational fluff, but actual neuroscience and psychology. Throughout this video, I've been describing internal working models as operating below conscious awareness, invisible scripts as automatic programs. That's all accurate. These patterns are encoded in implicit memory, procedural, automatic, operating outside conscious thought. That's why they're so powerful and so hard to change through willpower alone. But here's what happens when you bring something from implicit memory into explicit awareness. You literally activate different neural networks. When you can name your pattern, observe it, recognize it in action. Oh, that's my anxious attachment activating. Or, there's my avoidant withdrawal kicking in. You're engaging your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain involved in conscious processing, metacognition, and executive control. This creates what neuroscientists call a window of response. Instead of automatically reacting from your pattern, you've created a tiny gap, often just a second or two, where choice becomes possible. In that gap, you can ask, is this the response I want? Does this serve my adult relationships? Or is this just the old script playing out? Research on mindfulness and psychotherapy supports this. The simple act of labeling an emotion or recognizing a pattern reduces its automatic control over behavior. It's called name it to tame it in some therapeutic approaches. When you can observe your pattern rather than just being your pattern, you've already started the process of change. But here's the even deeper reveal, the thing that makes this video more than just information. The very fact that you've watched this far suggests something profound about you. You're not just passively consuming content. You're searching. You're trying to understand. You're willing to look at potentially painful patterns in yourself. That willingness, that curiosity about your own mind, that desire to understand why you do what you do in relationships, that's the seed of earned security. Think about it. People with deeply entrenched, completely rigid attachment patterns don't typically seek out hour-long videos about attachment theory. They don't have the curiosity or the hope that things could be different. The fact that you're here, that you've stayed until now, suggests that some part of you believes change is possible. And that belief? That's not nothing. Research shows that believing change is possible, what psychologists call a growth mindset, is one of the most powerful predictors of actual change. Here's what I haven't told you yet, a piece of attachment history that makes this all even more poignant. Many of the researchers who built attachment theory were themselves working through their own attachment struggles. Bowlby's early separation from his beloved nanny, his distant parents, his determination to prove that emotional bonds matter, you can see his own history woven through his theory. Ainsworth's meticulous observation of mother-infant pairs, her sensitivity to patterns of attunement and misattunement. Some scholars suggest this reflected her own quest to understand relationships. And Hazan and Shaver, who extended attachment theory to adult romantic relationships. They were studying something that mattered deeply to them personally, trying to understand their own romantic struggles through the lens of science. Science isn't done by detached observers floating above human experience. It's done by people trying to make sense of their own lives, their own pain, their own longing for connection. This brings us to the final truth about attachment. It's not a life sentence. Your early experiences matter enormously. They shaped your brain, your stress responses, your expectations about relationships. But they don't determine your destiny. You have agency. You have neuroplasticity on your side. You have the accumulated wisdom of decades of research showing that attachment patterns can and do change. The path isn't always easy. Earned security often requires therapy or deeply secure relationships that provide corrective experiences or years of conscious practice and self-awareness. For those with trauma histories, particularly those with disorganized attachment. The work can be longer and harder, requiring specialized trauma treatment. This isn't something you can simply decide to change and have it happen overnight. But it is possible. Studies tracking people over decades find that roughly 25 to 30% of people move from insecure to secure attachment in adulthood. That's not a small number. That's millions of people who started with anxious or avoidant patterns and gradually built security. Some through therapy, some through relationships with secure partners, some through conscious self-work, many through a combination of all three. And here's what I want you to understand about the moment you're in right now. Recognition is step one. You can't change what you can't see. For years, maybe decades, you've been following a script you didn't know existed. You've been wearing tinted glasses without realizing they were tinting your vision. You've been interpreting your partner's every action through a filter built when you were 2 years old, and you thought that filter was reality. Now you know. You can see the script. You can feel the glasses. You can recognize the filter. And in that recognition, possibility opens. Not certainty. Change is never certain. Not ease. This work is hard. But possibility. Genuine, real, scientifically validated possibility that your next relationship, or your current one, could feel different. That you could feel more secure. That the anxiety or avoidance that's shadowed your intimacy for years could gradually, with work and support, soften and shift. Your attachment pattern is part of your story, but it's not the whole story. You're also your choices, your growth, your moments of courage when you stayed present instead of fleeing or let someone in instead of pushing them away. You're the relationships where you've dared to be vulnerable, the times you've repaired ruptures, the moments you've offered or received genuine care. If you're struggling, if relationships feel impossibly hard, if you're trapped in painful patterns you can't seem to break, if the past keeps intruding on the present, please know that support is available. Attachment-informed therapy works. Good relationships heal. Understanding creates possibility. You don't have to do this alone. In fact, one of the core insights of attachment theory is that we're not designed to do it alone. Healing happens in relationship. Take a breath now. Feel your body in this moment. You've just spent an hour learning about the most fundamental force shaping human relationships. You've learned about Bowlby's orphans, Ainsworth's strange situation, Hazan and Shaver's love quiz. You've explored each attachment pattern, the neuroscience, the possibility of change. But most importantly, you've learned something about yourself. You've recognized yourself in these patterns. And that recognition, that moment of seeing the invisible made visible, that's where change begins. You're not broken. You're not damaged beyond repair. You're a human being carrying adaptive strategies from childhood, strategies that served you once, but might not serve you now. And you have the capacity, the neuroplasticity, the relational capacity, the human resilience, to build new strategies, new patterns, new ways of loving and being loved. Security isn't something you either have or don't have permanently. It's something that can be cultivated, earned, built. The research is clear on this. The question isn't whether attachment can change. It's whether you're willing to engage in the work of changing it. And if you've made it this far in this video, I'd say you already are. If this exploration of attachment has resonated with you, consider subscribing. This channel explores the full landscape of human psychology, not just attachment, but every aspect of how our minds work, how relationships function, how we can understand ourselves better and live more fully. May you move forward with compassion for yourself, understanding of others, and hope that the love you're seeking, secure, stable, deeply nourishing, is possible for you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're human. And humans, For all our struggles and wounds and complicated patterns are fundamentally wired for connection. That wiring might have gotten crossed or scrambled in childhood, but it's still there. And with awareness, with support, with time and patience and courage, it can be rewired. The capacity for secure attachment lives in you, waiting to be discovered or recovered. Your journey toward it has already begun. Rest well, and remember, you've already started changing.